From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations.
In his State of the Union address, President Trump attacks Democrats on the Mueller investigation, even as he calls for bipartisan unity. Trump also threatened a new nuclear arms race and vowed to build a wall along the southern border.
This is a moral issue. The lawless state of our southern border is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of all America.
In U.S. history, Trump did not mention the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, which even delayed his speech by a week. But former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams did, as she made history as the first African-American woman to give the Democratic response.
The shutdown was a stunt, engineered by the President of the United States, one that defied every tenet of fairness and abandoned not just our people, but our values.
We'll air highlights from the speeches of President Trump and Stacey Abrams, plus speak to Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. She recently became one of the first two Muslim congresswomen. A Somali-American refugee, she also became the first member of Congress to wear a hijab. We'll also be joined by Ana Maria Archila, who protested the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. She attended the State of the Union address as a guest of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump delivered the State of the Union address from the House chamber Tuesday night. In his speech, he repeated his calls for a border wall and referred to a, quote, tremendous onslaught, unquote, of migrants allegedly trying to get into the country.
In the past, most of the people in this room voted for a wall. But the proper wall never got built. I will get it built.
Trump, however, did not declare a national emergency over the border wall, as some had speculated. He addressed the situation in Venezuela, where the U.S. has been accused of orchestrating the overthrow of the sitting president, Nicolás Maduro.
2 weeks ago, the United States officially recognized the legitimate government of Venezuela and its new president, Juan Guaido.
In his address that lasted nearly an hour and a half, President Trump also warned Democrats against what he termed ridiculous partisan investigations, which he said could hinder American prosperity, and attacked abortion protections recently passed in New York and proposed in Virginia. Trump said he'll call for a federal ban on, quote, late-term abortions. Former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams delivered the Democratic response. Abrams slammed the recent government shutdown and spoke out against voter suppression. She also addressed gun control, climate change, and immigration reform.
We know bipartisanship could craft a 21st century immigration plan, but this administration chooses to cage children and tear families apart. Compassionate treatment at the border is not the same as open borders.
In Virginia, the president of Eastern Virginia Medical School responded to the ongoing scandal around the 1984 yearbook photo, which reportedly shows Democratic Governor Ralph Northam either in blackface or a Ku Klux Klan outfit, or at least it appeared on his Facebook, on his yearbook page. Richard Holman apologized for the pain inflicted by racist yearbook photos over the years and announced the school would investigate how such photos made it into the yearbook for decades. Governor Northam, who so far has resisted mounting calls to resign, initially apologized for the photo, but the next day walked back his statements at a news conference, claiming neither of the men in the photo was him, although he did admit to using blackface on another occasion the same year, dressing as Michael Jackson. Northam is reportedly hiring a private investigator to look into the photos. Pope Francis acknowledged for the first time that priests and bishops are guilty of sexually abusing nuns.
The mistreatment of women is a problem. I would dare to say that humanity has not yet matured. Women are second-class citizens, and it starts from there. No, it is a cultural problem.
Pope Francis has called a summit later this month on the ongoing sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. An anti-nuclear activist has accused former Costa Rican president and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Oscar Arias Sanchez of sexual abuse. Alexandra Arce van Herald, a psychiatrist and nuclear disarmament advocate who frequently worked with Arias, said he approached her from behind, fondled her, and forcefully digitally penetrated her while at his home in 2014. Arce filed a criminal complaint Monday against Arias. The death toll from a shipwreck off the coast of Bahamas over the weekend has risen to 29 as search and rescue teams continue to look for bodies. The ship was carrying Haitian migrants. 18 survivors of the shipwreck have been rescued. In Afghanistan, Taliban fighters killed nearly 50 people in a series of attacks in the north of the country Tuesday. The largest death toll came in a raid on an army base in Kunduz province, where at least 26 soldiers and police officers were killed. The attacks come the week after U.S. and Taliban officials agreed to a framework for a peace deal in Afghanistan. During his State of the Union, Trump touted U.S. involvement in the peace negotiations with the Taliban. A new report by CNN finds Saudi Arabia gave U.S.-made weapons to al-Qaeda-linked fighters and other militant factions in Yemen in violation of a U.S.-Saudi arms deal. Some arms may have also made their way into the hands of Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are using the weapons to buy the loyalties of various militias or tribes and gain influence in Yemen's political landscape, according to the CNN report. A U.S. defense official confirmed to CNN there's an ongoing investigation into the matter. General Joseph Votel, the head of the U.S. Central Command, told the Senate Armed Services Committee Tuesday he was not told about Trump's withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria before Trump made his public announcement in December. Votel also told the committee that, quote, the fight against ISIS is not over. A federal judge dismissed a lawsuit against Stephen Salaita, the American Studies Association, or ASA, and other defendants who were sued after endorsing Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or BDS movement. Professor Salaita joined the board of ASA 2 years after the organization passed a boycott resolution, but was still named as a defendant. The Center for Constitutional Rights, which represented Salaita, said in a statement, these desperate lawsuits brought to silence advocates of Palestinian rights are not only losers, they're hoping to grow the movement by making even clearer who is on the wrong side of history and who is the aggressor, who is unreasonable, and who wants to silence debate, unquote. The lawsuit is not the first time Salaita has been targeted in a case related to Israel and Palestine. In 2014, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign withdrew a job offer for a tenured position for Salaita after he posted tweets critical of the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, senators passed a bill that included the controversial anti-BDS provision aimed at preventing opposition to the Israeli government by allowing state and local governments to sanction U.S. companies boycotting Israel. The bill also includes an amendment opposing an immediate withdrawal of troops from Syria. Senators held a confirmation hearing Tuesday for Naomi Rao, President Trump's nominee to replace Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals Tuesday. California Senator Kamala Harris asked Rao about articles she wrote while in college in the mid-'90s, including a piece in which she blamed women for putting themselves at risk for sexual assault by drinking too much. Rao said she regrets her past views on sexual assault. This is Senator Harris questioning Rao.
You said, quote, women should take certain steps to avoid becoming a victim. What steps do you have in mind that women should take to avoid becoming a victim of sexual assault?
Senator, it's just sort of a common sense idea about, for instance, excessive drinking. You know, that was advice that was given to me by my mother.
So that's one step you believe women should take to avoid becoming a victim of sexual assault?
It is just a way to make it less likely.
Naomi Rao, who has never tried a case in court, also wrote in past articles that affirmative action is the, quote, anointed dragon of liberal excess, unquote, and welfare was, quote, for the indigent and lazy, unquote, and called LGBT issues a trendy political movement. A former Koch Industries official is overseeing research in the Environmental Protection Agency that will inform the regulation of certain toxic chemicals found in drinking water, causing some to raise concerns over a possible conflict of interest. David Dunlop was hired to the EPA in October and did not require Senate confirmation for his position. Regulations on the toxic chemicals will determine whether companies that produce them, such as Koch Industries, can be held liable for cleanup costs. The Intercept's reporting a top aide to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told health insurance executives from Blue Cross Blue Shield that Democratic leadership had major objections to Medicare for All and would continue to try to block single-payer health care. In a December presentation, Pelosi advisor Wendell Primus said that strengthening the Affordable Care Act and lowering drug prices were instead the priorities for the party. Polls have found that a majority of Americans support the idea of Medicare for all. Many high-profile Democratic lawmakers have also come out in favor of single-payer health care, including 2020 presidential hopeful Senators Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, Elizabeth Warren, and Congressmember Tulsi Gabbard. A federal judge approved a plan for Puerto Rico to restructure a portion of its debt Monday, which would require Puerto Rico to pay $32 billion over 40 years. Critics say the deal will allow vulture funds to make huge profits by buying up those debts. Several of those vulture funds include public employee pension funds and the investment funds of Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. Judge Laura Taylor Swain, who held a hearing on the proposed deal last month, echoed critics' concerns about Puerto Rico's ability to make the payments and the likely effects on public services. However, she said in her decision, quote, the court is not free to impose its own view of what the optimal resolution of the dispute could have been. We'll have more on Puerto Rico later in the broadcast. In Alabama, the Attorney General cleared the officer who shot and killed 21-year-old African-American E.J. Bradford, Jr. at a Birmingham area mall on Thanksgiving Day after responding to an unrelated shooting. The ACLU of Alabama said in a statement, the characterization of E.J. Bradford as a threat that needed eliminating reveals how little regard the Attorney General has for the life of this black man. We won't stay quiet while law enforcement continues to inflict lethal violence against black people and attempt to justify it, they said. Bradford's family say they will sue. In New York City, staff members and current and former prisoners at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center testified Tuesday that the heat at the detention facility started to fail as early as mid-January. The hearing came following reports that quickly spread over social media during the weekend that over 1,600 prisoners were being held without heat, hot meals, or electricity, including during last week's polar vortex. After the hearing, Judge Annalisa Torres visited the MDC herself to inspect conditions at the jail. You can go to democracynow.org for our 2 reports at MDC. And celebrities and fans are sending messages of support to Grammy-nominated rapper 21 Savage, who was detained by agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement on Sunday. ICE says British-born Shia Ben Abraham Joseph, better known by his stage name 21 Savage, overstayed his visa after coming to the U.S. at the age of 12 in 2005. A Free 21 Savage petition created by Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors has so far gathered over 200,000 signatures. Lawyers for the rapper say he's being wrongfully detained and that his new visa application is currently pending. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our viewers and listeners across the country and around the world. In his State of the Union address on Tuesday night, President Trump called for bipartisan unity while he attacked Democrats and the Robert Mueller investigation.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations. If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. It just doesn't work that way.
The president spent much of his speech focused on the southern border. He repeated his vow to build a border wall.
As we speak, large, organized caravans are on the march to the United States. We have just heard that Mexican cities, in order to remove the illegal immigrants from their communities, are getting trucks and buses to bring them up to our country in areas where there is little border protection. I have ordered another 3,750 troops to our southern border to prepare for this tremendous onslaught. This is a moral issue. The lawless state of our southern border is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of all America.
On the international front, President Trump announced plans to hold another summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Vietnam. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Congressmember Ilhan Omar. Stay with us.
Chile, a Bolivari galaxy, that will be the illest. Welcome to my world, the people's universe. Let's have a conversation that'll make your soul search Earth. Mother, it feels good to say things that uplift the hood. For what it's worth, we've been here for a while. Follow the moon, take a walk for a mile in the shoes of the man that pick you fruit. I want access to schools, I don't want to join the troops. You came to my country, you brought the dictator. Gave him money and told him pay me later. So taste the tomato, whatever. The students, the farmers, working together. Pa'lante inmigrante, no a la guerra. Mundo mapuche, siempre, forever. Human being, I got feet, so I walk. If I can't eat, I'ma move till I find my piece of the pie. A dignified life, wife and the kids deserve more.
I'm an Alien by Rebel Diaz. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we continue to look at President Trump's State of the Union address. On the international front, he announced plans to hold another summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Vietnam beginning February 27th. He also defended his decision to pull out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, a landmark nuclear arms deal with Russia. Trump went on to threaten a new nuclear arms race.
Perhaps we can negotiate a different agreement, adding China and others, or perhaps we can't, in which case we will outspend and out-innovate all others by far.
In other international news, President Trump warned against endless wars in the Middle East while boasting about recent U.S.-backed efforts to topple the Venezuelan government. On the domestic front, he criticized the state of New York for passing a law codifying a woman's right to an abortion.
To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in the mother's womb.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo responded on Twitter by writing, quote, "Breaking, real Donald Trump just proposed rolling back Roe, the law of our nation for 46 years, affirmed and reaffirmed by numerous Supreme Courts. Never. New York has a message to those who spread lies and fear to control women's reproductive health. Not going to happen. Not now. Not ever," Cuomo tweeted. Trump did not mention the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, which even delayed his speech by a week. But former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams did, as she made history as the first African-American woman to give the Democratic response.
Just a few weeks ago, I joined volunteers to distribute meals to furloughed federal workers. They waited in line for a box of food and a sliver of hope since they hadn't received paychecks in weeks. Making livelihoods of our federal workers a pawn for political games is a disgrace. The shutdown was a stunt engineered by the President of the United States, one that defied every tenet of fairness and abandoned not just our people, but our values.
We're joined right now by another history-making woman, Democratic Congressmember Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. She's the first Somali-American elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, one of 2 Muslim women elected to Congress, and the first hijab-wearing Congress member. She is a Somali-American refugee. We welcome you to Democracy Now! And want to start off by asking you, as you sat there wearing red, white, and blue last night, your hijab blue. What was your response to President Trump's State of the Union address?
Thank you, Amy, for having me. It was a really bizarre State of the Union address that kind of went along with the bizarrely scripted House of Cards scene that we just recently witnessed with the longest shutdown of our nation's history of 35 days. You know, I expected there to be a presidential address. I expected there to be an acknowledgement of the workers that he just used as political football. I expected there to be some imagination, a plan. It really felt like a pedestrian address. And I was taken aback by the lack of planning, vision, and interest that really went into bringing a unified message. Also, I would say, for this particular address, there seemed to be lots of hypocrisies. You know, he talked about welcoming legal immigration as much as possible, but we know that he limited the number of refugees that could enter this country. One of my guests was a legal immigrant from Liberia who has a DED status that he signed to end in March. He talked about ending endless wars in the Middle East, while he seemed to be excited about showing our military might. He talked about working with us in regards to reducing pharmaceutical prices, getting an infrastructure bill, while at the same time he talked about the Democrats and the constitutionally called for check and balance that we have in continuing the investigation to his administration. So it just did not feel very well thought out. It didn't feel like that this was the address that the people were waiting for. And I would say my sister Stacey and Bernie delivered more of a State of the Union address than the occupant of the White House did.
And I wanted to ask you, Congressmember, there were obviously many of the Democratic women were wearing white in this striking visual. At one point, the president remarked about the progress of women in the workforce in America, and all of the Democratic women stood up and cheered, and it seemed to unnerve him a little bit. I'm wondering if you could comment on the impact of that, of the solidarity among especially all the new women like yourself who are now members of Congress.
I think when he made that point, I don't think he was clued in to the fact that he was celebrating this wave of women who have now been elected to Congress. So we took that opportunity to really celebrate ourselves. Most of us are in Congress, also replacing male members. So the fact that Congress now looks more representative was one that we wanted to celebrate, and I don't know if he actually understood that.
Let's go to that clip. This is President Trump talking about what Juan just described, the women in Congress.
All Americans can be proud that we have more women in the workforce than ever before. And exactly 1 century after Congress passed the constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote, we also have more women serving in Congress than at any time before.
I'm going to go right.
That's great. Very great. And congratulations. That's great.
We also wanted to get your response, Congressmember Omar, to what's happening in Venezuela. 2 weeks ago, you tweeted, a U.S.-backed coup in Venezuela is not a solution to the dire issues they face. Trump's efforts to install a far-right opposition will only incite violence and further destabilize the region. We must support Mexico, Uruguay, and the Vatican's efforts to facilitate a peaceful dialogue. Let's go to President Trump's comments on Venezuela.
The legitimate government of Venezuela and its new president, Juan Guaido. We stand with the Venezuelan people in their noble quest for freedom, and we condemn the brutality of the Maduro regime, whose socialist policies have turned that nation from being the wealthiest in South America into a state of abject poverty and despair. Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
That's President Trump speaking at his State of the Union address, the camera focusing in on Bernie Sanders as he spoke. Congressmember Ilhan Omar, if you could respond on both of those issues, on Venezuela and socialism.
The president seems to be divorced from reality, really. We saw that when he made the comment in celebrating the wave of new members of Congress who are women, he didn't seem to recognize that most of us got elected in resisting his disastrous policies and steering our country into the right direction. He also seems to be divorced from reality when we're talking about the situation that's unfolding in Venezuela. You know, we understand that there is a crisis, and we believe in furthering democracy, but it is really important that we caution ourselves from getting involved and furthering suffering in countries like Venezuela. When he talks about the humanitarian crisis, when he talks about the need for the people of Venezuela to have self-determination, you know, I think back to what's happening in Saudi Arabia-led war in Yemen that the United States is assisting. That is the worst humanitarian crisis. Over 800,000 people have faced starvation. And so when we see this president make remarks, it really becomes easily visible to see how divorced he truly is from reality. I remember that most of us were laughing when he made the comments around socialism. What we advocate for, what Bernie, myself, Alexandria, Rashida, what we advocate for is an America that is prosperous, an America that makes sure that everybody has access to jobs, everybody has access to housing, everybody has access to health care, that we don't have an America where people are dying because they can't afford insulin, that we don't have an America where people are dying because they don't have a home and they're freezing outside, and an America where we deal with our homeless crises. And so when I hear him speak, there's a reality that he seems to be clearly divorced. I don't know if he knows how popular Medicare for All is. I don't know if he understands how popular freeing students from the shackles of debt is. I don't know if he understands how popular it is for us to critically address climate change. So clearly, he lacks leadership, and it's going to be really important for the next year for us to find someone who can lead our nation into prosperity and who is not going to be a liar-in-chief in the White House.
Congressmember Ilhan Omar, do you consider yourself a democratic socialist?
I consider myself a Democrat.
Congresswoman, I'd like to ask you about another portion of the president's speech. In his address, he criticized Iran, calling the country, quote, the world's leading state sponsor of terror. This is what he said.
My administration has acted decisively to confront the world's leading state sponsor of terror, the radical regime in Iran. It is a radical regime. They do bad things. To ensure this corrupt dictatorship never acquires nuclear weapons, I withdrew the United States from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. We put in place the toughest sanctions ever imposed by us on a country. We will not avert our eyes from a regime that chants death to America and threatens genocide against the Jewish people.
That was President Trump last night. Your response not only to the extremely confrontational attitude of the United States administration of President Trump via Iran and of course, most of the other European countries that participated in the negotiations of the accords with Iran don't agree with the United States.
Again, another example of how he's clearly divorced from reality. This is a president who has cozied up to Saudi Arabia, and to make a statement like that with a straight face really showed how disillusioned he is with reality. And I think, the kind of hypocrisy that goes with saying that we can't continue to fight endless wars, but he stands there and also speaks of aggressions that he wants to be part of in again that part of the world, to me just shows how this president is a liar in chief, how this president isn't really rooted in any reality, how this president can no longer lead this country, and the work that we need to do to make sure that we have a leader that understands that there's a difference between diplomacy and there's a difference between starting or aggravating wars.
Let me ask you about Trump's applauding the decision, his own, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is what he said.
One of the most complex set of challenges we face and have for many years is in the Middle East. Our approach is based on principled realism, not discredited theories that have failed for decades to yield progress. For this reason, my administration recognized the true capital of Israel and proudly opened the American embassy in Jerusalem.
Congressmember Omar, I wanted to get your response to that. And also, just before the State of the Union address yesterday, senators passed a bill that included the controversial anti-BDS provision aimed at preventing opposition to the Israeli government here in the United States by allowing state and local governments to sanction U.S. companies who boycott Israel. The bill also includes an amendment opposing an immediate withdrawal of troops from Syria. If you could respond to all of these things.
The move of the embassy was one that was widely criticized. It's not, I think, a move that lends itself to creating a positive environment, a peaceful environment in that region. I have, for a long time spoken about the kind of policies that we need to have in that part of the region, what it means for there to be peace, and how we can't divorce justice from peace. And it's going to be really important that we have people not only in Congress but in the White House who truly understand that. And the bill that passed was one that is similar to one that I voted against in the Minnesota House. It's one that has been making the rounds around the country in different state houses. It's one that exists really to drive a wedge between Democrats and score political points for Republicans. And I just urge my colleagues to not take the bait. It's really important for us to focus on protecting the constitutional rights of people and making sure that there is an opportunity for people in this country to fully utilize their First Amendment.
I also wanted to ask you about the Intercept report that a top aide to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told health insurance executives from Blue Cross Blue Shield that Democratic leadership had major objections to Medicare for All and would continue to try to block single-payer health care. In a December presentation, Pelosi advisor Wendell Primus said strengthening the Affordable Care Act, lowering drug prices were instead the priorities for the party. Can you respond to this, Congressmember?
We have a guarantee that the bill will have a hearing, so I'm looking forward to finally having that scheduled. I know that Congresswoman Chayabal has been working really hard, and they're, as the whip for the Congressional Progressive Caucus, I look forward to not only having conversations with our caucus members, but with the Democratic caucus, and maybe even getting some Republicans on board. Because this is a policy that is supported by the majority of Americans, and I know that when we are talking about policies like that, we can't just talk about them as a bipartisan policy here in Congress, but we have to look at it as a bipartisan issue with the American people, and it's in the interest of all members of Congress to legislate on behalf of the people who elected them.
Congressmember, I'd like to ask you about the portion of the president's speech that he spent the most time on, which is on the issue of immigration and the wall that he insists needs to be built, although he's changing the definition of the wall or the concept of the wall with every day. I wanted to ask you about his continued urging that Congress must pass legislation that includes money for his wall.
If you could respond.
For that part of the speech was very difficult to be present for. You know, I'm someone who fully understands the struggles that people go through to get here, to look for an opportunity in the United States. There's a famous poem that says, you know, no one leaves for the mouth of the shark unless the mouth of the shark is safer than home. And to have a president that continues to demonize immigrants and to speak of humans as aliens and to not recognize that seeking asylum isn't illegal is really devastating. I brought a recipient of DED, which is delayed enforced departure from Liberia, who arrived in this country in 2000 because of the civil war that was happening in Liberia. And for me, it's someone I fully connect with. I left my home country of Somalia because of the civil war. I'm the few fortunate ones who come here with a refugee status, who automatically have a permanent status in this country. Hers was a temporary one. And because of our immigration system, she is now living with the challenges of not being able to permanently start a life here. For 18 years, she's lived through this broken immigration system, trying her best to go to school, to work, to become a taxpayer, to contribute to her society, to become a member of her church, to give back in every way that she can. She left a 2-year-old son that she hasn't seen, and for over a decade, she has been applying for a permanent status. Her brother, who is a citizen of the United States, has filed papers for her. But because the system is so broken, people don't really have a path to permanency. And so what we wanted to hear from the president was a plan on how we give people a peace of mind, a permanent status to be here, to continue their lives. Being in this country for 18 years, for 20 years, for 30 years means that you no longer have a home elsewhere. This is home. This is where your friends are. This is where the members of your church, the members of your mosque, the members of your synagogue, whatever the case may be, this is home. And so for the president not to recognize that these are humans. There are humans behind the policies that we debate is really dangerous, because he continues to fan the flames of hate, and he continues to use the issues around immigration as one that is divisive and one that continues to instill fear in our communities.
Congressmember Ilhan Omar, we want to thank you for being with us for today's response to the State of the Union address. Congressmember Omar represents the 5th Congressional District in Minnesota, first Somali American elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, one of 2 Muslim women first elected to the House of Representatives, and the first hijab-wearing member of the House of Representatives. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we speak with an activist who was invited to the State of the Union address by New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Stay with us.
Si fuera presidente para mi gente, si fuera presidente, honestamente, presidente para mi gente.
At my inauguration, I burned tobacco at the opening. Send thanks and prayers to Creator and our living bees. Then I'd sit you down with your abuelita, rewrite history so our kids could see where we came from and a new destiny. From Flint to Cali, water flowing pure and free. My Department of Peace will melt guns into bike racks. Budget cuts to corporate kickbacks. If I was president, well, there'd still be drama. Takes a village, stickula, generational trauma. So shake your spine, put your hands up high. We got a different kind of party in the White House tonight. If I was president, hey, what would I do if I was president? Hey, I'd ask you if you were president. Hey, what would you do if it was you, or you? Me gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción. Gusta la lima, me gusta limón, pero no me gusta tanta corrupción. My people, it's 2017. We can't wait on no president.
If I Was President by Las Cafeteras here on Democracy Now! In the Democracy Now! Studios. You can see the whole interview with them at Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, as we continue to discuss President Trump's State of the Union, we're joined by Ana Maria Archila, a co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. She attended the address as a guest of New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
In September, Ana Maria Archila made headlines when she, along with another woman, Maria Gallagher, confronted Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona in an elevator after he announced his support of Judge Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to the Supreme Court. Shortly after the confrontation, Senator Flake called for a delay of the Senate vote pending a limited FBI investigation. Ana Maria Archila, how did it feel to be in the chamber, in the House of Representatives, what many were calling Pelosi's house, to hear President Trump? And there, of course, were the Supreme Court justices. Not all of them. Justice Alito wasn't there. Justice Thomas wasn't there. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't there. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wasn't there. But the man you were protesting, Justice Kavanaugh, was, along with Chief Justice Roberts and Gorsuch and Elena Kagan.
Good morning. It was really a night of contrasts. It was both incredible to see the sea of white, of women wearing white, representing both the history of our country, the history of women who have struggled to win the right to vote and to win the right to represent all of us, and who are actually the ones that are carrying the vision of a new country, a country that is possible, where all of us can live with dignity, like what Representative Omar just talked about. And on the other hand, there was Kavanaugh sitting there representing the failure of democracy, the inability of politicians, especially men in power, to really allow themselves to listen to the stories of the women they represent, to allow themselves to govern by listening, to imagine that their role is actually to bring the voices of the people they represent, maybe people whose life experiences they don't share, but whose aspirations they can actually try to understand. So I saw the presence of Justice Kavanaugh as a reminder of how much work we have to do to make sure that that our democracy really works for us. But I was also sitting there feeling so much gratitude for the wave of women, for the boldness of the leadership of the new, especially the new freshman class that includes Representative Omar, my own Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and so many other women who are really speaking to this idea that we can be a country that includes all of us, that we can actually have a future that includes all of us, and a future that recognizes the abundance of this country, and says in this abundance we should all be able to have health care, we should all be able to have dignified jobs, we should all be able to have time to rest, time for our families, a planet that where we have clean air and water. So I felt moved by I was very aware of how momentous it was and how much the moment was pregnant in some ways with possibility. And then Trump. He was still scapegoating immigrants. He was still telling lies. He was still speaking from both sides of his mouth, both talking about unity and immediately after that saying, well, we can only be unified if you don't investigate me. So I was just very aware of how much of a contrast we have in this moment.
And if you could give a brief response to his claim once again that the country is being invaded by caravans of migrants, and his call for more troops, his direction to have more troops sent to the border.
President Trump has been using immigrants as a scapegoat from the beginning of his campaign, from day one. It is a playbook that has worked for him because he knows that in the psyche of this country, you can appeal to fear and to a sense of lack of safety to justify the most horrible policies, whether it was slavery, Jim Crow, and now his anti-immigrant policies. There is a through line, and there has always the use of the threat of criminal behavior, and especially the use of the threat of danger to the women has been central to kind of racist policymaking in this country, and he's appealing to that. I was not at all surprised that he spent so much time talking about the caravan and again spewing lies, when in reality there is in fact a crisis. There is a crisis that he has created. There is a crisis of refugees that are coming to our ports of entry, which is exactly what refugees are supposed to do. It's exactly the legal way, and they are being turned around and sent back into violence and death. There is a crisis because families are being separated and thousands of children are in cages and thousands of parents are looking for them without knowing how to find them and reconnect with them. There is a crisis because people who have been in this country for decades, people with TPS, people with other immigration statuses that Trump has put in danger and has ended, essentially, are now having to imagine having to confront the possibility that they will be sent back to a country that is no longer their home. And so there is a real crisis. And
Ana Maria, even the latest news that it is believed thousands more, the government is admitting children. They don't even know where they are, that they separated. Finally, we just have 20 seconds, but both you and Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez were wearing pins showing Jacqueline Kalmakin, the 7-year-old migrant girl who died while in U.S. Customs CBP custody in New Mexico?
Yes, both of us were wearing the face of Jacqueline on our hearts because we want to remind people of the danger of giving Donald Trump a single dollar for his wall and for his anti-immigrant policies. Every dollar that goes to ICE and Border Patrol is a dollar that will result in more deaths at the border, that will result in more families separated, it will result in more children in cages and more deportations. This is not who we are.
Ana Maria Acila, I want to thank you for being with us, whose foot in the door, in the elevator door of Jeff Flake when he was going to vote for Justice Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice, led to her invitation to the House of Representatives and, of course, her years of activism before. Ana Maria Acila, co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. As we end today's broadcast on the latest news, Juan?
Well, a federal judge approved a plan for Puerto Rico yesterday to restructure a portion of its debt, which would require Puerto Rico to pay $32 billion over 40 years. Critics say the deal will allow vulture funds to make huge profits by buying up those debts. Several of those vulture funds include public employee pension funds and the investment funds of Harvard, Princeton, and Yale.
Judge Laura Taylor Swain, who held a hearing on the proposed deal last month, echoed critics' concerns about Puerto Rico's ability to make the payments and the likely effects on public services. But she said in her decision the court is not free to impose its own view of what the optimal resolution to the dispute could have been. Juan, you've been following these developments closely. Explain the significance of this decision.
Well, this is the first legally approved settlement of the Puerto Rico's $74 billion in debt. This only involves about $17 billion, but it's the largest portion of the debt. The COFINA, or the debt backed by sales tax of Puerto Rico, it's a terrible decision, most observers know, for the people of Puerto Rico, because even though it allows a haircut for these bondholders of about 32%, it basically kicks the can down the road and extends the length of the new bonds that will be issued for 40 years. And then the senior bondholders, which are the big players, and many of them hedge funds, will only have a reduction of their principal of about 7%, while the junior bondholders, which are basically investors, small investors from Puerto Rico, will have about half of their principal wiped out. And the important thing to understand about this is who is benefiting. It's the vulture funds once again. There was a report by the Committee for the Abolition of Illegitimate Debt that analyzed some of the debt holders. For instance, there's the Bopos Group in Boston, a hedge fund run by Seth Klarman, that has $900 million of this COFINA debt that's got this settlement. Their big investors, well, several of their big investors are the investment funds of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Then there's Golden Tree Asset Management, which has $2 billion of this COFINA debt, $400 million of which they acquired after Hurricane Maria, when Puerto Rico debt was, you could get it for pennies on the dollar, and now they're going to make a huge killing on the fact that they're getting 93 cents on the dollar for this COFINA debt. And then there's Tilden Park Capital, which is run by Josh Birnbaum, who used to be a managing director of Goldman Sachs. They have $950 million of COFINA debt. They're going to make a killing. These last two, many of them have investments from public employee pension funds in New York and Illinois, retirement funds, Texas, Los Angeles county funds. These are the pension funds that are providing the money for the vulture funds now that are reaping the benefits. Even Antonio Weiss, who was President Obama's point man, who developed and basically pushed through the Promesa bill, has criticized this deal. He said in an article in Bloomberg News a couple of months ago, it will just be a question of time before the Commonwealth is forced to default yet again, or curtail pension payments to more than 325,000 workers. So it is, unfortunately, Judge Swain felt that legally she did not have the authority to override this, but it does mean that if this is the signal of where the rest of the settlement of the Puerto Rico debt is going, is going toward. The vulture funds and the hedge funds are going to walk away with killings, and the people of Puerto Rico are going to be left once again with increased austerity.
And again, explain what COFINA means.
COFINA is the sales tax authority that Puerto Rico created. Basically, when it could not legally issue more debt, it created a separate authority and siphoned off the sales taxes of Puerto Rico to guarantee the debt to bondholders, which is why Puerto Rico has perhaps the highest sales tax in the United States, 11.5% right now.
Well, we will continue to follow this. And this all happening after Hurricane Maria.
Right. Using the money that the federal government is giving to Puerto Rico for reconstruction to help pay a portion of this debt, undoubtedly.
We'll go to the vulture funds.
Yes.
Well, to see all our coverage on Puerto Rico, you can go to democracynow.org. A belated happy birthday to Hugh Gran. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for a full-time 1-year paid news production fellowship. Details at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warnoff, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masood, Trina Durate, Maria Studio. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.